Welcome to the Topco Business Unusual podcast. Today I'm joined by the very lovely, beautiful, award-winning author, director, Kate Moodley. Wow, it's great to see you. You're beaming, and you've just had a child, and you're still beaming. So,
thank you, Ralf. Thank you. I'll take that and I'll run with it. Thank you. Sorry, what did you? I didn't get the question. Sorry.
I hope you're well, I said, but I know you are.
Very well, thank you. I hope you are well as well.
Yes, you know, probably not as well as you. You've got young children to keep you going, but yeah, a new child.
The lack of sleep, yeah, that's for sure.
You don't look like it. It looks like you're getting all your sleep, but
definitely not, Ralf. Definitely not.
And are you back to work, or you know, just working remotely?
So, I mean, when I obviously had my kid, I went back quite soon. I think I did it for my first kid, and my second one came a bit more naturally. And then obviously because of lockdown, we worked remotely for the first few weeks, and we officially opened our offices about a month now. And so, quite conservatively as well.
Yeah. And so how did you find the lockdown with a brand new baby with no sleep? Was it good timing, or was it?
It was tough, Ralf. It was not easy. You know, trying to manage, because we've got two boys. The older one, you know, him being at home. And interestingly enough, we have a great support structure. But I think when you're home, your kids want you. They don't want the helper or the nanny or the grandparents. They really just want you. So it was quite difficult to manage it in the beginning. But I think I got into a rhythm quite soon after that. So yeah, it got better. Definitely did get better.
I think what it showed, and I mean, we can talk about this later, but it just showed in terms of the role of women in the modern workplace, how suddenly it is there for everybody to see just the challenges for women that are way different from men, and the respect. I think I know there was a lot of violence and abuse against women, but I think on the other side, in corporate world, there was certainly an eye-opening and an empathy, almost like, oh wow, you guys rock, because we don't know how you do it.
Absolutely. I think from my perspective, firstly, I've got to commend my husband. I think he plays a very, very big role in terms of taking on the responsibility. Our entrepreneurs, and we kind of split the responsibility really, really well. But I think what was interesting is that in my space specifically, and I as I think I've indicated previously, is that I work with predominantly females. And what I saw came through quite solidly. It was really hard for them to balance everything, you know, to still run what we needed to do, because even though we went into lockdown, we were still very operational. And how to balance doing schoolwork and cooking and taking care of their family and working a full day, it was really challenging. But as a leader, I think it taught me flexibility. You know, it taught me to be okay that, you know, there are times during the day that your staff are going to actually sit down and do a team session with their kids. So that was really nice, because I think it kind of moved me into a much more fluid space, being an employer, being a leader, because I understood my own challenges, which made it a lot easier for me to understand others. So it was a really good learning curve for myself, and I think for my team, we still managed to get what we needed to get done, just at a different time possibly in the day, versus kind of being at the office doing certain things, so delivering certain elements during a set period of time. But we were just equally successful.
And I mean, how much has the organization that you're leading, because you lead the franchise division?
So yeah, I'm the franchise director for one of the areas called the DCS Bedford View area. Yeah. So that's my responsibility. Sorry, Ralf, your question?
So I mean, how much has the business changed with COVID? Has it changed at all? Has it not been disrupted? Is it just business as usual? Has it been like a pivot?
So it's been an incredibly interesting time for us. I think it's changed quite a bit, because obviously, firstly, you go into a lockdown period, which means that you're working remotely. So as a big business, we had to sort of mobilize everybody into their home space, and we managed to do it really successfully. So I think from that perspective, we were quite proud of that. I think the second element is we still managed to deliver the same level of service to our financial advisors as well as to our clients, even though we went into this lockdown period. I think where the challenge possibly came through is where our financial advisors had to kind of change this face-to-face ability to sit down with the client and actually market Discovery's products. Now they had to do it over a Zoom session. And it's quite challenging, especially if you haven't established a relationship with the client. It becomes quite difficult to do so over a Zoom session. So I think those were the things that we kind of saw that was difficult. If it was an existing client, it was very easy to continue doing business with them. But the truth of it is from a new business perspective, it was quite hard. But looking at our figures and looking at our stats, I think we did really, really well considering lockdown and the regulations that went around the ability to do business. We just kind of navigated different product lines. And I speak specifically on my business, where we might have traded down on some lines, we found opportunities in others. So if I think of Insure as an example, where clients started budgeting, they started re-looking at their premium. So it created a massive opportunity for us to bring on clients that weren't Discovery Insure clients. And we actually did exceptionally well in the last couple of months on that particular product.
So it seems a way that some business units sort of fell down, but others, the growth markets, and you can see how technology is going to create these opportunities. It's funny how you mentioned Discovery Insure, because I think it's been highly talked about around that the vitality and also the banking around this movement towards behavioral sort of engagement, and it's got a lot of plaudits internationally. I know you guys have won a lot of awards and stuff. How much of a difference does that make that you have a different sort of value proposition to possibly other insurers who are looking at just a solution versus changing your behavior?
Yeah. So I think when we initially launched Discovery Insure, it's quite a while back, it's a different concept being brought to market. So it wasn't easy to sort of get people to sort of buy into the concept. But guys that have engaged on a vitality level, when you're launching a product on behavioral banking or where you're monitoring an individual's ability to drive, it becomes easier to sell that because they've already engaged, they understand what the thinking is behind it. So I think you're absolutely right. It's a one-stop shop. We have every offering now. Specifically, I think with the add-on of banking, it's phenomenal because the individuals that we have a phenomenal client base, which means that we have a great opportunity to bring on those clients from a banking perspective. But just experiencing it in my own capacity compared to a competitor, it's been a phenomenal experience. And I think if I look at it, I'm probably an example of that, of someone that's got every single product at Discovery, including banking. And I can understand the value of the integration chain. So if I look at it, I think as we progress on the banking side, it just ties in everybody, and there's a greater value offering overall in terms of all product lines, as opposed to just being a pure insurance company versus looking at the banking sector, which is now part of our business.
And it's interesting that everybody's sort of within their organizations using your products, because I mean that's an employer brand of choice, really. I mean to have that scenario.
Yeah.
Do you think that was thought of, or do you think it was by accident, or?
So are you referring to from the perspective of an employee and being part of it? I think when you're in the business, you're so passionate about it, right, Ralf? You understand how it works, the value proposition. I mean, how could you not want to be part of the business? So how could you not want to be part of banking or Discovery Insure or Life or Invest? So I think just being in that space, you understand the value that you're receiving from the product suite itself. It makes it almost impossible for you to be anywhere else. So that's my thinking.
I think you take it for granted, but not every organization has that same situation, to be fair.
Yeah, no, true. Very true. Very, very true.
I wish it was. But
Discovery people are incredibly passionate about the brand. I always say it's like, for me, it's my spiritual home. I can't even explain that to anyone. It's a perfect fit. But yeah, it's very difficult to kind of probably explain it to someone else who's not very pro-Discovery.
But I know you also wrote the book about be the CEO of your own brand. So it's sort of like, do you think there was lessons from the way the Discovery positioned themselves? And then, you know, you talk about how you accidentally found this, you know, wrote this book, but I mean, are there likenesses, do you think, or?
Definitely, because I think it goes back to the most fundamental, which is reputation. I think if I think of when I talk about this concept of personal branding, it really is built around what is your reputation. Reputation supersedes product. You know, you can be placed in one company versus another, but people trust you as an individual. And I think the same principle applies in the Discovery space because it's such a strong brand, especially from our health perspective, because we dominate the health market. And I think the reality of it is that based on that, it makes it easier for a client to sort of integrate all the other business with us. So it really is about branding and reputation. And I think it ties in really, really well from that perspective.
I mean, I get the impression that more now than ever, people should be or will be investing in their own brand, especially with COVID, probably pre-COVID, but even now more than ever, because they don't quite know where they stand in terms of their organization. So they need to now position themselves. Are you getting that sort of feedback?
Definitely. I think, you know, if you look at it, the business market is contracted quite substantially, which means that in order for you to build a very good personal brand, you've got to be really good at what you're doing. You've got to be the best in it. You've got to have this reputation of excellence. And I think people have focused inwardly around that because you've got to become more marketable. So if, for example, if companies are not employing, but they would look at employing the best, that's what will be the differentiator. So I always said, like, within the space of kind of developing your own brand, it's critical that when you're looking at your field specifically, whatever it is, be it in the legal profession, be it insurance, mining, engineering, you've got to make sure that you are the best in that particular space itself. And I think when you kind of have got to that point, then you know that it's not about applying for a job, or it's not about trying to hunt for business. People already trust you and they know that they will come to you. And the same applies in business. You know, it's all about reputation. It's all about connection. It's about making sure that you're very good at it, and it becomes unquestionable in terms of whether people want to engage with you or not, or whether they want to do business with you. So you're absolutely right. I think COVID's put a lot of pressure around the best of the best coming out. I don't think organizations will retrench individuals that are not good. I think they need that kind of brain power. They need people that are exceptionally good to allow the business to continue. They're probably retrenching individuals that are the weak links in the space. That's my personal view on it.
Obviously, we do awards and conferences and that sort of stuff. And so we have a view on reputation, enhancing reputation. I mean, what have you seen as the big drivers for people? So if someone's like, hey, I want to improve my brand, my personal brand, what would you encourage them to do? Because obviously working hard is one thing, but it's not just about working hard. You know, there's a certain amount of smartness to it and research. And I interviewed Magda from Signia the other day, and she talked around, you know, viewing the landscape, assessing the landscape.
Yeah, I think that's very critical. I always say it's also about being street smart. So you can have the academic smart and you can have the street smart. And that the combination of both is absolutely critical, because if you're going into an organization, you've got to understand who are the influencers in your space. And, you know, whether you're connecting with those individuals is absolutely critical, because business is about who you know. It's about how you've connected with people, because to get an opportunity just at random becomes really difficult. So I think when you're looking at this concept of sort of building a reputation and focusing on building a brand, it's a combination of various factors. So I call the black and white, which is your CV in terms of what you've achieved, your academics. It's also inclusive of your connections in terms of the people you connect with, your network, etc. And also, you've got to be able to back what you've put out there. You've got to be really good in terms of what you're promising to deliver. So if you talk about being the best in a particular field, you've got to be able to back it in terms of what you've delivered and your sort of history in terms of where you are. So I think it's really a threefold approach to it. It's not just pure academic picture, looking at someone's CV and thinking you're fantastic. It really is about connectivity, networking, which is inclusive of the same category, but also the ability to be exceptionally good at your job. It's really about its reputational excellence, I think, more than anything else.
How big is marketing in that? Because I mean, I often think of like authors, for instance, and Robert Kiyosaki had that famous interview with a leading journalist in Hong Kong, and they said, "How did you become the best-selling author?" And he suggested that she does a sales training course, and she said, "I'm an author." And he said, "Well, look at best-selling," and so. And I think of people who get degrees, and it doesn't help if you've got a degree if no one knows about it. And so, how important is marketing in this, do you think, for personal branding?
So I think at the outset, you shouldn't be the world's best kept secret. I always say that, in terms of people knowing what you're capable of doing. But I think there's also a fine line between arrogance and confidence. I always think of Facebook as a wonderful example. Sometimes people get too caught up, or social media, let me be clear about it, social media, Instagram, Facebook, they get too caught up on this concept of self-promotion. But I think you've got to be very careful about what you're putting out there. Some people construe you as completely self-centered. It's all about you, it's your ego, as opposed to really questioning what value are you adding. And I think that's the difference, is that if reputation is around value, it's not what you get out of it, it's what you can add to the space that you're in or the community that you're in. And that, I think, should be showcased. But it doesn't have to be in a flashy manner. It can be in a humble manner, but yet you can win the hearts of people, if that makes any sense. So yeah, I think you've got to just watch that. It's incredibly critical in terms of your brand, but don't be arrogant about it while you're building your brand.
I agree. I think it's also like in LinkedIn actually says the line, it says, "What do you want to share?" And it's a platform for sharing with your colleagues. It's not really about you. And I mean, during this time, you talk around building those relationships and getting out there and meeting people, which I also agree with. And some people aren't good at it. But I mean, with COVID, that's an even bigger challenge. What are you seeing how people can get through that? Because for me, that seems like the biggest challenge. A lot of people's cell phones are not there. They're not in an office environment to get hold of people in that manner. Isn't quite the same. Building those relationships and those rapports with those influencers is going to be a bit harder.
So my experience has actually been the opposite. I think during COVID, people have relaxed a little bit more, right? So it means that you can connect with them on a different level. And what I mean by a different level is that you see the human side to them. For example, a webinar this morning, and on the webinar, in the background, the kid was shouting, screaming, and it was like the wife was chatting. It was more real. It's not, COVID is a tough place because you're dealing with so many emotions. So each person is going through challenges in their own drama, be it financial challenges, be it they're on their own, be it like overwhelmed, you've got too much happening. There's so many sort of different perspectives. And I think the reality of what I've experienced is that if you reach out to people now, they're more than willing to sort of connect with you because they kind of need someone that's there for them. And I think the intent of why you're reaching out to people is also critical. If you're reaching out with the wrong intention, people read into it quite quickly. If you reach out because you truly care for them, it holds a lot of weight, and it becomes really critical, and it shows them that there's value to this relationship. So I think in COVID, initially when we all went into lockdown, we also focused inwardly, and I think you had to consciously kind of bring yourself out of that space to sort of say, there are other people out there that need you to reach out to them. And my experience has been fantastic. If anything, we've gotten closer. Now, I think of my team as an example. We meet more often on Zoom, and we have a lot more fun on Zoom, I think, than we've ever had in the past. And it's been a fantastic experience on that level. Even on a family level, you're meeting on Zoom, irrespective of the context, but you just have a lot of fun, and you laugh, and you just kind of make the best of the situation. So you definitely can connect with people over this period. If anything, people need you more now than ever.
Yeah, I think that's the opportunity to reach out because of that. It's about how you can serve people. I mean, that's the way I try and look at it. I think there's that principle in life, is that you do good to one person, it comes back to you. And so how can you serve people? What can you do for them?
Yeah. It's critical. It's absolutely critical, Ralf.
So, I mean, one of the other things that we're seeing is obviously gender empowerment is growing in terms of its priorities in the country. And I know that you're like a judge and you speak it out. What are your thoughts on gender empowerment currently?
I think, if I look at the country as a whole, I don't think we're nearly where we need to be. That's the truth of it. In terms of, if I just take it as a pure statistical view, I don't believe we are close to where we should have been. I mean, almost 25 years into it. And I think we could have done a lot more. But saying that, I'm proud of where we are. We've achieved a lot more. We've focused a lot more in terms of it. I just feel like my only concern is that, COVID must not put a stop to it. And what I mean by it, because everybody's just got so much on their plate, so much on their agenda, it's like a survival period. That's how I see it. And I really hope that gender empowerment is not on the back burner. I think that is kind of the thought process that I'm in terms of organizations, in terms of businesses, in terms of us as individuals. We so in this COVID period, we need to get through it. We need to find a vaccine, and we're all just outwardly focused. And I think, because remember, empowerment is a matter of the heart, right? So you've got to be able to understand that it's not something you park on an agenda and you leave it. It's got to be something that's there all the time. And I'm not convinced that everybody has continued that journey during this time. I think they've parked the agenda, and it's a concern for me, to answer you.
I think logically for me, if I see how we can push through and grow, it is through gender empowerment, because I think that's the biggest growth opportunity that we have, is bringing women, including women, into the economy, helping them grow their businesses. We know that they are better with money. We know that they're obviously more secure in terms of when they take on debt, they're more likely to pay it back. We're seeing in the States that the growth in businesses is coming from particularly Black women. That I think it's about 3,000 new businesses every day are coming from Black women. And so we're seeing internationally that if we can get behind women and growing them within organizations and entrepreneurs, it can completely transform our opportunities as well. Someone mentioned, yes, we did a masterclass. Carl did a masterclass, and I think they said that 90% of women's income in some way forms part of the investment back into the household, where it's about 40 or 30% for men. So they're also growing.
Incredible stats, sure.
It's terrible, but I think if we look at, I think it's also one of those things. You said it's a motive thing, but actually from a male's perspective, I look at it as a very logical thing. I look at it as very, like, if you look at the data, I don't want to be funny here, but you'd be an idiot if you're not driving gender empowerment, because it makes sense for every commercial and social company reason.
But Ralf, you and I understand that. We know it's critical. I'm not convinced. I mean, if you kind of think about it, if everybody understood it the way we did, don't you think we'd be far further down in terms of what we would have achieved and where we had to be? And I'm just saying that I'm not convinced that it's on everybody's agenda. And that's just it. It's not a tick box in a space. It's not a to do this, and it's like one of the items on the agenda. It is part of the strategy. It should be part of the strategy, because the common sense approach is there. The data shows that it's incredibly critical. I'm not convinced that our leadership in this country has taken it as seriously as they should. I don't believe that. Because if they had, would it not have been a different outcome? That's my view.
I mean, I kind of think it's a cultural possible problem, and like a legacy issue, culturally, legacy-wise. But also, I mean, someone said to me 100 years ago was the first time women were really brought into education, right? And now you're seeing universities, which are far more women getting PhDs and qualifying and going to tertiary university in the States than men now. I think it's like 60% compared to 40% men. It's driven that way. So looking at that and knowing that after studying comes skills and then employment and work, are you not thinking that it's going to naturally happen and that that natural shift is going to happen, or do you think it needs way more emphasis still to drive that because of the culture issue, the biases?
Definitely. I don't believe it's a natural process. I think it has to be, it's a mindful process, it's a conscious process. It's start pushing the agenda. It is women that have already reached positions of influence that can change it. I don't believe it's a natural, I absolutely don't believe it's a natural process. I think and it also is very cognizant of what the culture is in the business itself. You know, not diversity, but if transformation is critical, then it would be on top of the agenda. But it's not a natural process in my view. It really has to be, it kind of has to be pushed. It has to be irrespective of whether, you know, the stats on an education level proves differently. I mean, I always think of it, I did a course at Harvard like just over a year ago. And it goes to your point where it was predominantly split. I think the class was about, and I quote the figure, it was about 70-30, 70% female and 30%.
Yeah. Some schools it's that bad, yeah.
Yeah, and it was I mean, we were representing different parts of the world, right? So it was really nice to kind of see the investment in female leadership and the future of those individuals. But I don't believe it's something that comes naturally, because when I'd connected with some of them in that space, it was really about asking for the opportunity versus being given the opportunity. That makes any sense. I had to kind of push, this is why it's important to me and this is why I have to do it. So that's why I say I don't believe it's a natural process, but that's just on an international scale that was what I experienced. And I just think that, but I think that the more, you know, women, I think we confuse this. It's not a gender issue. It's not about women taking ownership for it. I think it's equally important to a man that's in a position of influence. He has to actually see it as a matter of the heart. And in my view, in my experience in being in the insurance field, there's very few leaders that see it that way, that are driving that agenda, that wants to see that kind of transformation. I don't think it comes naturally to everybody, if that makes any sense. And I don't think it's a deliberate attempt not to sort of push the agenda. I just think they just kind of go with what's worked, if that makes any sense. What's the
maybe the unknown?
Sorry?
Maybe it's the unknown. They don't know. They don't know what they don't know. You know, and so it's about education and driving it. I mean, one of the other big issues that I see is you know, access to funding just generally for entrepreneurs, but driving entrepreneurship in South Africa. How do we, you know, I think one of the reasons the States is so successful because that access to funding across different disciplines. But I mean, I see that as a potential big opportunity if we can get more funding, mainly for women entrepreneurs, but even, you know, township entrepreneurs in general. If we can get behind our entrepreneurs, I think that's going to be a big opportunity. And reading your book, I think, is something that's going to help them, because I also get the sense that just coming out of university and becoming an entrepreneur is not necessarily always the right way of doing things.
So Ralf, I have a view on that. Can I share it with you?
Yes.
You know, like, people are so eager about becoming entrepreneurs, and they all think they're going to be the next Bill Gates, or, you know, it's just for me. And I think you've got to have your tenure. And what I mean by that is, for an individual that just comes out of university, in my view, it's critical for them to work for an organization and get that kind of experience first, for a number of reasons. One being, you firstly kind of seeing how a corporate works, or if it doesn't have to be corporate or private, it can be public or private. You understand the workings of the environment. You kind of build your reputation, you build connections, and you build contacts. And I always think of it like it's better for you to go that route, learn how professionalism works, how does it operate, dynamics, etc., and then go into becoming an entrepreneur. I think a lot of people just think, oh, I want to start a business and it's going to be great and it's going to work. But we've seen a lot of businesses fail because of that. And I think that lack of experience and lack of exposure, and I think EQ, right? It's critical. Over time, you build EQ. I think people just think if I've got a good idea and I've got a product and I've got the will, I can do it. And I've seen so many businesses fail because of that. I'm just saying, if you've given an opportunity to work for an organization, take it, learn from it, and then when you're ready, go into that space of actually setting up your business.
Is it not a case of a reality that education is a little bit broke? And what I mean by that is that education is great and getting a skill and a degree is important. And I think there's many attributes to that. But what I often find is people who enter the workplace with a degree, the degree is not giving them necessarily the skills that's required in the work environment. And so that's the one part. The other part is a lot of big organizations like the Discoveries, the Standard Banks, these great organizations, world-class organizations, they've got some amazing development and learning programs that in some way not just mimic universities, but are far better at training, giving you skills than universities. And so you're getting almost free, you pay at university and you're almost getting paid to learn in a corporate.
Yeah, absolutely. I think, but the challenge in that example, Ralf, is that organizations are not going to employ you if you don't have a degree in some instances. Well, in most instances, right? They're looking for the academic because you've got to find something that levels the playing field. Matric does not level the playing field. Probably honors degree, maybe a master's to some level, actually kind of levels the playing field. So I think that's unfortunately what we have to go through in order for us to get the opportunity, if that makes any sense. And I always think in my space, if I had a choice between two candidates, one's got a BCom degree and one doesn't have a degree, there's no way I'm going for the candidate without the degree. Yeah. Because the level of knowledge that comes with the individual that's got the BCom degree will far exceed the person who's just completed matric. So I think that's kind of, we've got to find out what's the leveler, in terms of it. So it's not a waste of opportunity. But I do think, to go back to our point, was that working for an organization gives you a different set of skills. You talk about you talk about skills and how to develop it. You need to work, be it for a small business, large business, whatever it is, to kind of develop that work experience and that exposure and skills. You don't just walk into something and hope that it works out. You don't just develop skills by reading. We as academic as we want about things, but what really works is real life experience and exposure to clients and exposure to how to deal with conflict and dissatisfaction. I think it's a completely different dynamic.
I think also one of the other things I was thinking with entrepreneurs that I think is a little bit of a challenge, and certainly I find in South Africa, is this notion of selling and sales as a role and as a tool. And I mentioned it earlier, but I watched Dragon's Den the other day, and there's a young doctor, really clever, great idea. And they said, well, why haven't you aggressively gone out and tried to sell this? And he kind of said, no, I'm not ready to sell it. And so they loved him. They loved the idea, but because he didn't have this desire to get out there and sell and promote his own product, they sort of declined the opportunity. I mean, how important do you see having that sales skill, having that ability to share stories and to engage with people and show value? How important are you seeing that?
It's so critical. Let me give you an example and I'll tell you why. In our space, when we went into lockdown, there were a certain number of advisors that did exceptionally well during lockdown. And then there's guys that just couldn't mobilize their business at all. The guys that were able to mobilize the business were the true sales individual, because it didn't matter what forum or platform that they were using. If they have that innate ability to sell and to connect with people and the desire, they were able to do it over Zoom, in front of a client, or even on the telephone, as an example. So they had this ability to sort of go with the times. They changed, they transformed their business. And then the guys that I refer to as not the true sales individuals struggled. To now, they're still struggling how to sell to a client over Zoom, which is interesting. So I think in business, it's critical, because if you can't sell yourself or your product, what's the point then? I think I mentioned earlier, you can't be the world's best kept secret. You've got to have this ability to get out there, market what you've got, but don't do it in a flashy manner. Do it in a manner that connects with people, that they can see value. So it's absolutely critical.
And one of the other things I think that's come out for me, and it's quite, the story shows itself, presents itself in numerous ways, but and it's within you as well. Like, I know that you wanted to be a lawyer, and then you became an entrepreneur. And so what happened is you had a plan, but you moved away from it. You were agile, and saying that, and you talk about the salesperson selling no matter what, and it seems like this agility quotient versus this EQ or IQ seems to be far more successful now than ever. And the amount of people I've done podcasts with that are extremely successful like yourself, but had a very clear vision of what they wanted, but then, wow, something happened and they pivoted and they just went with that opportunity. How uncanny is that you had the same...
Exactly the same experience. I think, and for me, what was interesting is that when I kind of shared with my family that I'm not going to be pursuing, I mean, I studied the degree, I got the master's. I mean, like, I went right to the end, if you call it. And then it wasn't the right fit for me. But getting into the role that I did wasn't like I kind of knew what I was doing. It was just an opportunity that presented itself. And I thought, let me just apply and see what happens, And then it was just, the rest is history. And I always say nobody gets into insurance by choice, right? It's really by default. But I think I realized that I was more passionate about this than I've ever been about the legal side of it. And it came naturally to me. So I think you eventually find your way, and you have to be agile. I think your word is absolutely critical. You can't set out your career or your life in a certain manner. You've got to have this ability and flexibility to sort of change. And truly successful people are the ones that have the flexibility to change. Lockdown presented the same challenges to every single one of us, but it's how you dealt with it. How did you change your life to adapt to it? And I think the individuals that, when people ask me, how was business? It was actually not bad. It was when we had a really good run. And it's just because in my head, I think initially I was like, oh, this is a bit overwhelming. But then I think I took a day or two and I was like, okay, this is what I'm going to do. This is how we're going to do it. And it worked. It's still working as to where we are. So I think it's just, it can be overwhelming in the beginning, but you kind of regroup and you just change direction. But you've got to have that flexibility, be it in a career, be it as an entrepreneur. In order to be successful, you've got to be able to be agile in whatever space it is.
And at the moment, you've had a good run. How do you see the future for South Africa or Africa in the near to short term? How are you seeing things?
So, I'm incredibly loyal to South Africa. So I'm very optimistic, maybe sometimes a bit too optimistic about the way I see things. Yeah. But it serves me, right? So I think in terms of where economically, I think we've got our challenges ahead. I mean, I'm not naive about it, where we are economically. I do still think that we have the right leadership. I know South Africans are putting Cyril under a lot of pressure. My view is that he's got to undo what's happened over the last 10 to 15 years. You've got to give him time. You don't expect him to resolve this overnight. I'm an absolute fan of his leadership. I think he's thought out, he follows corporate governance, he doesn't act on emotion. So I like that kind of thinking and that kind of leadership. So I do think that if you hold out, South Africans hold out, and we kind of just run through this challenging time, it's going to be incredible. The journey is going to be incredible. In saying that, I do think there's a lot of opportunity that's come out of COVID. It's just about sort of having you've got to be alert about what's available, and people are looking for opportunities. Yes, we've lost, businesses have closed down, but you've got to be able to reinvent yourself in order to succeed in this period. And it's a true test of that. It's re-engineering. It's kind of, it's as much as it's tough, but it forces us into a space to just re-look at everything and see what are the opportunities and just go for it from there. So I'm really optimistic, but economically, I'm not naive about where we are in terms of what's going on.
I mean, I echo your thoughts about Cyril. I think that I have a lot of respect for him, and I think he's in many ways done a lot. I think there's one or two shortcomings that I certainly feel there's room for improvement. One is speed, and I think that process of engagement is obviously necessary, but I get the sense now we need to just turn on the gas, man. I just really feel like anything about pivoting or transformation, it requires speed, and dealing with corruption requires speed now. It needs that definiteness. It needs almost, I don't know, I feel like there's a transformation with him that needs to be seen now, a little bit more authoritative in terms of dealing with it, not it's going to this committee. It's like, we're going to take this stuff on, and the speed with change. And I think that comes with, I almost get the sense that a lot of the ideas that are sort of floating that I'm hearing aren't necessarily new and relevant to what other new age companies are doing. And so that worries me a little bit as well, that maybe he is modernizing systems or processes, but it feels like we're talking around old ways of doing things and not a new way of thinking. And I just wonder, and for me, it's like, I think business has the biggest opportunity. You look at someone like Discovery, you're renowned for thinking differently in a new way with changing behaviors, because that's what needs to happen. We need government to change behaviors, we need society to change behavior, and we need business to change behavior. And so how do we collectively bring in business to help him to use some of the knowledge that's happened? And it's not a criticism of him, it's just like, it's an observation. I've got a lot of respect, and I understand he's got many people he's playing up against, but I almost feel like now's the opportunity to push that gas and to lean into business more, to the way that they've used data and behavioral science.
I think Ralf, if and we're not having a conversation about Cyril, but I think if you had to kind of give him a clean slate, if you kind of think of how he's operated in his business, it is completely different to operating in politics, right? Because he has complete autonomy in his business to do whatever he wants to, and he did it very successfully. I think the difference here is that he's accountable to a lot more than what we understand. There's a lot more undercurrent that we try. There's a lot more that we don't have access to, and I think that sort of stumbles him, in my view. Because if you look at the Cyril in business, the Cyril in government, is completely different individuals. And if I had to say, if you were to give him the Cyril in business to operate in Cyril in government, we have a completely different individual. I think just the structures sort of limits his ability and his movement, because you're giving him complete autonomy in terms of how he should be doing things. And I think that's the challenge. That's the way I see it from my perspective.
No, I probably do echo what you're saying there. I think that there's an underlying frustration that we understand that the mechanics of how our political system works, there's room for big improvement, because obviously nefarious people have used it for their own ways, and they're almost stammering his ability, and he has to go through these hoops and loops where you kind of get the feeling that there's some reworking of our systems. And I think it's not just South Africa, it's the UK, Brexit, you got the US, Donald Trump, and the whole mechanics there. So unfortunately some people are seeing gaps in these mechanisms of government and used it for their own.
And it's a completely different animal, right? It's completely different in terms of how you operate yourself in those spaces. It's not as clean cut as we think it should be.
So, I mean, we've spoken quite a lot, but I mean, and maybe what I wanted to do was to just sort of finish up with giving the listeners just some value in terms of, you wrote the book a couple of years ago. What do you think are like the 5 to 10 takeaways from personal branding? What would you say are the 5 to 10 takeaways that they can implement in their lives to either grow their business or grow their careers?
I think at the outset, when you think about this concept of personal branding, I think what's really critical is understanding what is your reputation. You got to have this conversation with yourself and say, well, what is my reputation at the present moment? And don't take a view of, kind of taking a soft approach. And what I mean by that is that you might think you're in a certain way, but in actual fact, it's completely misrepresented, or it's different from a perception perspective. I think what's also critical when you unpacking this conversation about branding is understanding what is your unique value proposition. What makes you different? What is the value that you're delivering to the environment that you're in, be it personal or professional, or whatever concept it is. The other sort of tip or advice I would give you is that, you can be so good. I think I mentioned it earlier on, is that you can be so good in terms of what you do, but if no one knows about it, it's a pointless exercise. It's completely that.
On that personal branding, like, what are you good at? I actually struggled myself in some ways to do that. And then I listened to, I think it was a podcast or a webinar with, what's his name? It starts with Y, Simon Sinek.
Yes.
And so and then I think they even asked him, how did you get to your why, your purpose? And he said, I don't know if you heard this before. And he said, basically, he said, go and ask a friend why they're friends with you. And then they'll tell you the usual stuff, because you're this, and then keep on challenging them. And then as soon as they tell a story about you, so you challenge them maybe 10 times. Yeah, but that's other people do. But as soon as they tell you a story, that will end up being something that will then resonate with why you actually are friends and what's different about you. And he suggested you phone someone that you would only phone at 3 a.m. to pick you up if you needed help. So not necessarily a family member. Then I tried it, and I think it worked.
Not someone that's going to tell you what you want to hear, right? That's also critical.
I think the thing is that many people know that they need to have a personal brand, but I think people struggle. Like, I know I did with then the how. How do I find these questions out? What are the, like, even with purpose?
But I think it's that conversation, and I suppose it's my last point on that. It's like, it's about moving from purpose to legacy. I think if you understand your purpose, which is the journey you went through, but I think also reflecting on what are you going to be remembered for? What is important to you? Who is important to you? And for me, legacy is a critical part of who I am, because I always reflect on, if something happens, if to me today or tomorrow, whenever, can I honestly reflect on the legacy and say that I'm really proud of it? I've done my best, be it from a family perspective, a business perspective. I think purpose is really personal. I think it's something that you've got to kind of understand, why you're doing what you're doing. And it's interesting, because I think no matter how successful we become in life, I think what truly makes us happy, what I can speak for myself, what truly makes us happy is how we impact other people. With a positive impact on that individual. That actually it's a matter of the heart, and it goes to that value. I think all the peripheral issues are irrelevant. So I think if I kind of look at it and that's part of your legacy, right? It's kind of what you want to be remembered, that you've had a good impact on people, you've been good, and you've been a grateful individual. You're not arrogant, you're humble, you've achieved success, but you've done it in the right way. And I think if you kind of reflect on the end, for me, that would be the answer. And when you're talking about your reputation and your brand, kind of figure out what is the legacy that you want to be remembered for. When that door's closed, you're not in the room, what do people say about you? I think that's an important question.
Do you have any tricks for how people can think about their legacy? Or not tricks, tools?
Let me just think about that.
The one I was told was, what would people say at your funeral?
Yeah, so your obituary, right? Yeah.
So I know that the one CEO of a company, his brother passed away, but the press said that he passed away. And so the press then sort of said how wealthy he was, but how he was a bit of a Scrooge, and how he didn't really give back, and how he hadn't helped society in terms of his innovations. And so then when they all found out he hadn't actually died, it was his brother, he felt a little bit embarrassed. But from that day onwards, he changed things, and he's the guy that created the Nobel Peace Prize.
And that's an interesting situation, because if you think about it, I mean, death is quite morbid, right? So we don't ever want to get to that point where we're thinking about it. But I think it's trigger points. Someone asked me the other day, how do you know if you're a bad person? Someone's going to tell you that at some point, Ralf. Someone's going to tell you that you're a complete idiot and you don't treat people well. And I think it's those kind of points that should stop you in your tracks and actually say, wow, is this exactly what I'm about? Is this what I'm going to be remembered for? Is this the impact I have on people? So I think you will get your clues along the way. You've got to be open to those clues.
Are you listening?
Yeah, are you listening? I think that's really critical.
For sure. Well, it was really amazing to talk to you. I feel like we talked about so much, and it was great catching up. And
You
congratulations once again for your newborn, 2 boys. You're 1 before you catch us up.
Thank you. I really, really appreciate it. It's great to see you as well.
Yeah, it's great to connect with good old friends. So hopefully we see you soon at one of our events or our virtual events.
Virtual events, definitely. I've seen how you've managed to reinvent your business. That's incredible, though. Really, really.
I think we had to. And I agree with you. I think some people, I was almost, not looking forward to it, because I don't think anyone was looking forward for this amount of change. But in many ways, for the last couple of years, we've had some very clear plans about moving digitally. And so it almost gave me that excuse to really push that agenda very strongly. Where I think you're right. I think people struggle to change, and so gender empowerment, transformation, all those things. And so when they always say, like, don't waste a good crisis. And so we haven't.
But I'm very proud of you guys. It's incredible.
Thank you. Well, it was lovely catching up, and hopefully see you in person soon with your boys.
Thank you. Thank you.